Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've prepared another quick list video for all of you. We're going to be calling this one 5 genre-bending comic book omnibus editions. These are modern books I've picked out that I think play with genre in a particularly fun way, or try to do more nuanced things than some other straight superhero comic book fare. I'm pretty excited to talk about this prompt and these books, but before we do, I want to shout out the channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's probably the best way to support this channel. Thank you so very much for considering. Now go ahead, settle in, and let's get started with today's list. First up today, in no particular order, we have Black Cat by Jed Mackay Omnibus. This omnibus includes, the run of Black Cat by Jed Mackay, along with the Iron Cat miniseries. This was a really fun read for me. I actually reviewed it on the channel not that long ago. Why I wanted to include it today on the genre-bending list is that I think you hear Black Cat, you think kind of vigilante-style, heroics kind of genre, and while there is some heroism going on here, I think the primary genre for a book like this is actually more of a heist thriller kind of fiction. There are several heist genre tropes I see here, her assembling the team, making the plans, and of course enacting the heist. We have a lot of great twists and turns and thriller elements as well, and honestly, I think that is a huge selling point for this book. Does she get embroiled in more super heroic antics throughout the run? Absolutely. This is still a superhero-based book, but it relies heavily on that heist mechanic and heist kind of cornerstone for most of it. I think most of the story arcs are organized by each subsequent heist, and in the case of the Black Cat omnibus, the person she's robbing from is generally one of the Marvel superheroes, though not exclusively. This was a really fun twist, not only for this character, but for a Marvel comic book run, in my opinion. I really liked seeing Black Cat out of the shadow of Spider-Man and holding her own in this series. I think Mackay definitely handled this character with a lot of tenderness, and honestly, it was absolutely a blast. He created so much lore for this character, her world. I love the supporting cast of characters we got in this run as well. It was all very memorable. The art throughout it is also quite interesting, as you've been able to see. We have a couple notable artists on this book, but it changes hands pretty frequently. So if there's an art style that's maybe not to your taste, rest assured there are several more in the waiting. I really liked it though, and even as the artist changed hands, I never felt pulled out of the narrative. I think all the styles had something to contribute to this run, and I think having Jed Mackay's voice at the helm of it, it just had this consistency and cohesion, book to book, artist to artist, that just really worked for me. With Jed Mackay's Moon Knight omnibus slated to come out in the coming month, at least at the time of this recording, I guess Jed Mackay's just been on my mind. So re-examining his work here on Black Cat for me is a real treat. Like I said, I did review it not too long ago, but it's definitely one that's staying with me. There was a lot of really fantastic character moments, and if you are a Spider-Man fan seeing this omnibus, maybe like me you were unaware of it for quite some time, I will say if you're buying it for Spider-Man, that's maybe not the best motivation because he's only in it a couple times. Granted, when he shows up, they are very amazing scenes, or in one case, issue or two, but he's really not the driving force for this run. No, the main motivation is squarely on Felicia Hardy's capable shoulders. Next on our list today is Grayson, the Superspy Omnibus by Tim Seeley, Tom King, and Mikkel Janin. This is a DC Comics Omnibus edition collecting the entirety of the run of Grayson. For those that don't know, this is Dick Grayson of popular Robin and Nightwing fame, but in this case he is here as a super spy. Think something along the lines of James Bond, and you are not far from the mark here. Now this is a book I've reviewed on the channel as well, and I've showcased it, several times on the channel if you're a long-term fan. Why I wanted to showcase it though for this genre-bending list of mine is that you think Dick Grayson, you probably immediately think of his vigilante superheroics, but here we actually have a total geopolitical spy thriller. Yes, this is still Dick Grayson, this is still Nightwing, but he is out of costume for most of this omnibus. And though he is the protege of Batman, he's using some of the detective work and that stealth work to really infiltrate a corrupt spy organization. Like I mentioned earlier, if you are a fan of James Bond, whether the novels, the comics, the movies, this is honestly something that might be up your alley. I would say it's one part James Bond, one part, comedic here and there. It has a dash of that Batman flavoring as well, and we have an interesting blend of genre here that, again, sits most comfortably in a spy fiction thriller subgenre, but it just works all things at once. We do have a couple notable appearances of Batman in this book, but really this is following Dick Grayson, and it's following Dick Grayson out of his normal costumes. One of the things I did enjoy about it as well, though, being a longer-term Dick Grayson and particularly a Nightwing fan, is how much this still feels like the character of Dick Grayson. He's serving a different role, he has a different look, he has a different supporting cast for the most part, and yet this is still definitively Grayson, and I really enjoyed that. I can tell Seeley and King really handled this character with care. And as a fan of Dick Grayson, that was really one of the most valuable things about this book for me. It doesn't seem out of place, it doesn't seem like fan fiction, it just seems like one of the most unusual chapters of a very beloved character's life. The art throughout from Janin is absolutely stunning as well. It absolutely sells that kind of spy, exotic locales, interesting people kind of look that I associate with spy thrillers, and it's just really wonderful to look at. This series reminds me in a way of Dan Slott's Superior Spider-Man in that I feel like the general premise for that, in the same way for Superior Spider-Man, it's Doc Ock inhabits Spider-Man's body trying to become a superior Spider-Man. I feel like while interesting, that premise feels like it could really backfire and really do a disservice to a lot of fans, and yet that series really works. In the same way, I feel that's true here with Grayson. You're taking a beloved costume vigilante character and you're saying, what if Dick Grayson was a super spy for a clandestine and shadowy organization? I don't think it should work on paper, and yet here we are with a really amazing classic. Next up is another DC Omnibus. This is Swamp Thing, the New 52 Omnibus, and I really enjoyed this book. Now, why I put it on the genre-bending list, it might be a bit of a stretch, but stay with me if you will. This book is written by Scott Snyder and Charles Soule, though not concurrently. Rather, we have Scott Snyder's run at the beginning of the book, and then we have Charles Soule taking over the whole back half of the New 52 era run. We have both of those runs sandwiched back to back in this one gigantic tome. Why I say this is a bit genre-bending is because as a longer-term Swamp Thing fan, we see him kind of invade other genres, but I think what's interesting with how they approach it in New 52 is that when you read the first half, Snyder's run really feels like a body horror action blockbuster thriller, and then once we get to Charles Soule, it really plays more into the kind of dark fantasy subgenre, and if anything, we get into more like science fiction and slice of life, and so when you read this all from end to end, there is this kind of interesting dynamism as far as the genre as you go across it. I definitely had affection for both halves of this book. Both runs, I think, had their selling points, but I like overall, when you read this omnibus, how much it plays with that genre. It really does pivot rather hard as we switch run to run, but it all works really well to sell this one central character. When I think of Swamp Thing, I think he works a little bit more effectively when it favors kind of the Charles Soule envisioning of this character, which leaned a little bit more into dark fantasy, kind of horror stuff. But overall, like I said, I think if you're a fan of Swamp Thing as a character, or if you like kind of horror superhero comics, Swamp Thing is probably always going to be a sell for you. But if you want more nuance in what Swamp Thing does as far as genre, I think this is a really good book for you, because you get that Swamp Thing horror as it pertains to body horror and just high octane kind of adventure blockbuster thriller, but then you also have horror as it leans into dark fantasy and leans into slice of life and leans into science fiction. And I think that that was really fun to see. I really don't want to spoil too much here. If you want to get more about this book, you can definitely check out my full review of the title. But I just thought this was a good example of how it played with genre and specifically subgenre. It added a lot of layering to what is normally a fun kind of horror-themed book by going in just some of these distinctive ways, all within one hardcover volume. Definitely don't miss out on Swamp Thing's New 52 era. And while I have your attention, if you're enjoying this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I would just like to encourage you to do so. I'm always doing comic book list videos like this, comic book reviews, unboxings, shorts, and more. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's keep this list going. Next on our Omnibus list today, we're going to be looking back on the Marvel side of the fence with Spider-Man by Todd McFarlane Omnibus. Now first I'll say this should not be confused with the Spider-Man by David Michelinie and Todd McFarlane Omnibus, which collects their run together on Amazing Spider-Man. No, rather this is just the self-titled Spider-Man comic series that was initially launched, written, drawn, inked, everything by Todd McFarlane. And that's the run we have here in this smaller omnibus. This whole omnibus I think is less than 20 issues. It's definitely a smaller one, but it is just a treat to behold. Seeing McFarlane's art in oversized hardcover format like this is a dream. Undoubtedly, he left an imprint on our favorite web slinger, and I think fundamentally shifted the ways artists depicted this character and his favorite webs. Why I decided to include this on a genre-bending list, however, is that I really like the flavor McFarlane brought to Spider-Man, and that goes more than just his visuals. What he has in his self-titled Spider-Man work here is a kind of Spider-Man horror tinged series. I really like it because I don't think Spider-Man always delves into the genre of horror, but when he does, it's definitely pretty memorable, and I feel like this entire run definitely leans to the darker side of things. For example, we kick off with a notable story that leans into kind of monster psychological horror. We have the lizard prominently featured in this story arc amongst some other great notable villains. We have another story in this book that follows the hobgoblin in an even more terrifying form than usual. Toward the back end of the omnibus, we have a story with Wolverine and the Wendigo, which is kind of a monstrous looking forest dwelling kind of not a yeti, but its own kind of creature, but it all just really works together. McFarlane's pencil work here is just an absolute beautiful piece of work, but really it's the way he plays with genre I find fascinating, especially for Spider-Man, who, like I said, usually doesn't go down this avenue. I think it's pretty well done, and that's another reason I wanted to showcase it here, not only because I think it is a fun play with genre for a normally straight-laced superhero comic, but I think for me, I honestly think this is a bit of an underrated gem. I think people either avoid this series or they buy it only for the art, and sometimes I've heard a lot of disparaging things about McFarlane's actual writing, and while he is perhaps not my favorite Spider-Man writer, I think that they maybe do him too much of a disservice. I think if you're a fan of kind of light horror or even just kind of monster fiction, I think that this is a really fun and fascinating run, and I think McFarlane handles it pretty well, even with his duties as a writer. If you're looking for a fun Spider-Man series that isn't overlong, overbloated, has beautiful artwork, and satisfactory writing that does lean just little bits into kind of a horror subgenre, you could do far worse than Spider-Man by Todd McFarlane. And finally, to round out the list today, I couldn't talk about genre-bending comic omnibuses without bringing up my favorite example, and honestly probably the inspiration for this video, and that is Planetary. This is the Planetary Omnibus by Warren Ellis and the late, great John Cassaday. This was initially a Wildstorm series. I think that publisher or that imprint was bought out by DC, so this is a DC omnibus, but this is a really fun book. I bought it completely blind earlier on when I started my channel, so I think it's one of my earliest reviews actually, but I had a ton of fun with this. I did not know what to expect at all. I think overall, if you enjoy science fiction, this is probably a book for you. Ellis basically delivers a love letter to just so many fictional genres, the history of comics, and so much more. This whole thing works together and serves this central overarching narrative and vision, but along the way we have these kind of little pastiche vignette issues that all showcase a different kind of subgenre of fiction. We go one issue straight into kind of a superhero straight-laced comic, next to something like a giant kaiju monster-inspired issue, next to kind of a gritty neo-noir ghost thriller, next to a 1950s sci-fi giant creature throwback, next to, the list goes on and on and on. But if you're a fan of fiction and literary genres of all kinds, this is a must read. I think even particularly as a comic fan, the visual styles that Cassaday introduces us to, even as we shift through genres, is just a masterstroke. This is some of my favorite work that Cassaday has produced, and honestly, he was one of the reasons this was on my mind. Unfortunately, he passed away rather recently, so I've been thinking about this run, his run he did on Astonishing X-Men with Joss Whedon, and a couple other things I have from him, but this is really a terrific book. I think for me, like I said, I didn't know anything about it when I went in, and I'll try not to spoil much here, because I do think if this sounds even remotely up your alley, you have to experience it for yourself and follow all the twists and turns as you enjoy the ride. I will say I think the writing was absolutely expertly handled, and I love the way this team addressed all of these genres. I will say this, as far as the central kind of premise or idea of the series, we basically have this organization known as Planetary that kind of tries to keep existence in order, trying to stop kind of weird threats or otherworldly type or supernatural type happenings, and we basically have a small group of people, in this case it's a team of 3 or 4, that basically go and take these different cases that lead them into all of these adventures, misadventures, what have you. If there is a genre or subgenre this most operates in, I have to give it up to science fiction, but again, I think to say it's just a science fiction comic does it a tremendous disservice. This is a really fascinating and layered work, an absolute wonder, and a title I hope to visit often in the future. Okay, and with that, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up our list for today. This is 5 genre-bending comic book omnibus editions. I know the prompt might be a little bit unusual, but I was really excited to put this one together for all of you. You'll have to let me know what you think of this idea in the comments below, as well as if you have any other omnibuses, or honestly any other comic book runs you feel like really play with genre in a fascinating way, whether it's mixing a bunch of different unusual subgenres together, playing with a beloved character or franchise in a genre it isn't often in, some kind of mix or match of these, or something other. I would like to hear about it in the comments below. Or generally, if you've read any of the comic book runs I discussed today and want to talk about them a little bit in the comments, I would encourage that as well. I would love to get the engagement going, just to talk about why we love comics, why we love these comics, and things like that. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, that comment we talked about, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thanks everyone, have a good one.